Yes, every month you're going to be having a talk like focused on a different religion, and then it's an opportunity to just develop a greater understanding about different religions. Is that basic?
And they set up a system of interfaith coordination groups, the idea being that they would relate to all the interfaith groups within a particular area of the country. And I know that Leslie and Rame, for instance, are involved with the East of England Faith Forum, which still exists, I think, and the North Eastern Faith Forum still exists. A lot of them have gone by the wayside because they, erroneously in our view, assumed that because government funding had ceased, they somehow could no longer exist. But we are living proof that there is life after death, so far as funding is concerned. We have continued in southeast of England. Although paradoxically, I don't think we include London. London had its own, but I think that's probably folded. But with the recent variety of recent events, we in the South East England Faith Forum, which has an elected regional body for the forum, have taken the view that we need a renewed emphasis upon mutual faith understanding. So one of the ways in which we are pursuing this is by setting up a bi-monthly lecture. And we've chosen for it to be in honor of our former colleague, Elizabeth Jenkerson, a picture of whom will miraculously appear on the screen in a bit, I think.
Sure. Oh, lovely.
Elizabeth not only was extremely active on the Southeast Faith Forum, but was extremely active within Baha'i activities, but also she organized the national conferences of the National Association of Teachers of RE, sometimes, NASACA sometimes, without making a fuss about it. And she also served on 3 sacres, Portsmouth, Southampton, and Hampshire. She was, by profession, both a teacher and a librarian, and she was also a very fine linguist. She'd spoken Spanish and English from her childhood, and subsequently learned to speak Italian when she lived in San Marino, and Portuguese when she lived in Lisbon. And so we have chosen to name our interfaith lectures after Elizabeth, and she passed away not far off a year from today, a year ago today. But the intention, as I said, behind the interfaith lectures, that's fine, thank you, Emma. The intention behind the interfaith lectures, thank you, is to project religious diversity. We all need to understand each other and our faith better. And of course, the choice of whom to...
I'm going to go to another room.
Okay, thank you. The choice of whom to take as our inaugural lecture is actually quite difficult, because we might be accused of having a bias towards one faith group rather than another. This bias, we maybe have been thought to be biased towards one faith group rather than another. And also, had we chosen a less than thrilling speaker, that could have been disastrous, and the lecture series could be held below the waterline before it even started. So we chose instead to invite a really cracking speaker. And you are going to be very privileged to hear her today. This is Seeta Lakhani of the Hindu Academy. Also, a Hindu tutor, the Hindu tutor at Eton College, which will mean something to Mike Gamage at the very least. And she's going to talk to us about God's soul and spirit from a Hindu perspective. She will talk for getting on for an hour, and then we'll have time for some questions. And when you want to ask a question, please use your electronic hand if you know how to do it, and we'll take you strictly in order. Seeta, thank you.
Thank you so much. And it's a real privilege and honor to be asked to come and speak to you. And it seems that you're a wonderful group of people. So I hope that we can have a very interesting dialogue together today. So the first thing I wanted to speak about is the foundation to Hinduism, and where do we find the foundation to Hinduism? The foundation to Hinduism comes from something called the Upanishads. And the Upanishads are a wonderful foundation to Hinduism. They capture the essence of what Hinduism is all about. But the thing is, when we sit down and we try and read the Upanishads, they can be quite difficult to understand. They're very subtle and they're very poetic. And on top of that, there are 108 Upanishads. So it's actually very difficult to get our minds around what is being said in the Upanishads. But there is one text which is sometimes referred to as the last of the Upanishads. And that text is called the Bhagavad Gita. And what that does is it captures the essence of what the Upanishads are. It goes through and picks out all the key spiritual gems and synthesizes them and brings them together beautifully. So it's far more likely that a Hindu home would have a copy of the Bhagavad Gita than it would have a copy of all 108 Upanishads. But having said that, the fascinating thing about the Upanishads is that over the course of hundreds and thousands of years, they have remained largely unchanged. They have remained largely unedited, which means that they are a wonderful time capsule in a way, which enables us to chart the historical growth of spiritual ideas over time. And the Upanishads largely examine the relationship between man and God. And it's fascinating to see how that relationship changes and evolves over time. You may be surprised, actually, but the evolution of ancient Hindu spirituality is in fact not too dissimilar to the evolution of politics. For example, in ancient times, you have a kingdom which is ruled over by a king, and you also have neighboring kingdoms which are also ruled over by their own respective kings. And once one king becomes aware of the presence of the other kingdoms, there is a desire to take over and rule all of those other kingdoms as well. And there are tussles and battles and wars until there is one absolute king reigning supreme. And in those days, it was an absolute monarch. He wasn't just a figurehead. He was fully responsible for the welfare of millions of people under his rule. But after a while, humanity tired of this approach because we somehow felt that our civil liberties and our civil freedoms were being curtailed by such an approach. And we see over the course of human history the evolution of higher and higher democratic ideals, the evolution of higher concepts of civil liberties and freedoms. We in fact find a very similar progression in ancient Hindu spirituality. We started off with many gods who are responsible for our world. We started off with the rain god, the sun god, the moon god, the wind god, all of these various gods who are responsible for their piece of our world. But after a while, these many gods were replaced by one absolute God, one absolute ruler of the entirety of the universe, a human being immensely magnified and exaggerated. And this God was responsible for every aspect of our universe, and he was responsible for every aspect of our life. And this one absolute God was given epithets of being all powerful, all compassionate, all loving, and all knowing. And we worshiped this God for a very long time. But after a while, we found that there was a bit of a discrepancy between the nature of God and the nature of our world, which is filled with pain and suffering. Because how can an all-powerful, all-compassionate God allow such tremendous suffering in the world? This is a huge philosophical problem, not faced just by Hinduism, but by all the major world religions. How do we solve this problem? And we find, in fact, in the Upanishads, you may be surprised, there is a rebellion against this one God of the universe. Not only was the idea of many gods unbearable, but so too was the idea of one absolute God of the entirety of the universe. So we find over the course of the Upanishads the dethroning of this one absolute God of the universe. God as a personality is broken down, and God as a principle is built up. So rather than thinking of one absolute God, one absolute personality, we replace that idea with the idea that there is one divine principle which permeates the entirety of the universe. And this one divine principle we called Brahman. So here we see that God has undergone a radical transformation from an almighty personality to a divine principle which permeates the universe. And this seemed to be a more philosophically sound approach, because a principle does not need to answer to epithets of being all powerful, all compassionate, all loving, and all knowing. A principle is a principle. This is the nature of reality. This is how the cookie crumbles. So this principle-oriented approach seemed to make a lot of sense. But having said that, we've said earlier that the Upanishads largely examined the relationship between man and God. But here, God has undergone a radical transformation from a personality into a principle. So what of man? Well, in order to keep it a level playing field, man too must also undergo a similar radical transformation. So over the course of the Upanishads, we see that man as a personality is broken down, and man as a principle is built up. But what does that actually mean? That means that we no longer look to the external qualities of man, but we look to the innermost essence of man. We look to the innermost essence of our soul. And this in the Upanishads is studied as a principle, which we called the principle of Atman. So we see an incredible transformation over the course of the Upanishads, which began by studying the relationship between two personalities, the personality of God and the personality of man. And that is then replaced by understanding the relationship between two principles. The principle of Brahman, the divine principle which underpins our universe, and the principle of Atman, which examines the essential nature of our soul. And over the course of the Upanishads, we see these two gradually converging lines of Brahman and Atman, until we reach the conclusion of the Upanishads, where the two principles finally meet, where Brahman and Atman meet. And the conclusion of the Upanishads is where they declare, Ayam Atma Brahma, which means the innermost essence of my soul is in fact the very same divine principle which is permeating the entirety of the universe. Aham Brahmasmi, it tells us, which means the innermost essence of who I am is this very same divine principle permeating the entirety of the universe. So we find at the conclusion of the Upanishads, there is an incredible oneness behind it all. But we are still left with one big philosophical problem, and that is, if there is ultimately only one, why then do we see the many? Why do we see suns and moons and stars and planets and galaxies? Why then do we see billions and trillions of life forms on Earth? And the best answer provided by the Hindus is the concept of Maya, which tells us that this one never became the many. This one only appears to have become the many. And the purpose of our spiritual journey is to see through the veil of appearance, to see through the appearance that there are many, to realize the oneness behind it all. So you can see over the course of the Upanishads, there is an incredible transformation in ancient Hindu spiritual thought. But this rattled many Hindus who are used to thinking of God as a personality, who have spent the entirety of their lifetimes focusing on a personality of God and loving that God, somehow felt as if the rug had been pulled from under their feet. They say, hold on a second, we love the personality of God, and here you're replacing him with an impersonal principle. I love my God. And even if my life involves pain and suffering, which is an inevitable part of all of our lives, I still love my God. I see everything as the will of God. So please, we are not interested in philosophically challenging our God. We love our God. Please leave him alone. And Hinduism is and has always been a spiritual democracy. It never rules with an iron fist. It never forces people to accept a concept that they are not comfortable with. In Hinduism, there is no order of men to determine the doctrines to be followed by the masses. People are given an incredible amount of freedom to establish their own philosophies, to develop their own sectarian movements, which is why Hinduism is home to hundreds and thousands of sectarian movements, with new ones springing up all the time. The amount of religious activity which takes place in the name of Hinduism is immeasurable. But coming back to our point, many Hindus were saying, hey, hold on a second, we don't like this principle approach. We like to think of God as a personality. And Hinduism very much says, if you like to think of God as a personality, by all means do so. Follow that path to its conclusion. And the amount of freedom which is given in Hinduism is such that we don't have just one form of God that we choose to worship and adore. We have over 330 million different forms of gods and goddesses to choose from, to worship and to adore. But underpinning all of that, we understand that all of these different deities are, in fact, different manifestations of this one absolute God. So here we have the personality-oriented Hinduism, but we also very much have the principle-oriented Hinduism that we were talking about earlier. And both of these approaches seem to be radically different to each other. And it makes us wonder, how can these two approaches sit under the same umbrella of Hinduism? Is there any reconciliation between personality-based Hinduism and principle-based Hinduism? And there is, in fact, a beautiful reconciliation, and that reconciliation comes at the deeper experiential level. Because the thing about Hinduism is we place a tremendous amount of effort on developing first-hand spiritual experience for ourselves. It is not enough to just read the scriptures or to just carry out rituals. We need to utilize those tools to help us develop that first-hand personal spiritual experience for ourselves. And it is at this deeper experiential level that we see the beautiful reconciliation between personality-based Hinduism and principle-based Hinduism. Imagine there is a Hindu and he loves to think of God as Shiva, the personality of Shiva. He spends his entire life praying to and worshipping the personality of Shiva. And over the course of his lifetime, he builds a wonderful, loving relationship with the personality of Shiva. What is the conclusion of that love? The conclusion of that love is where the barrier, the boundary between myself and my God dissolves away. I am no longer able to differentiate myself from the deity that I love. So the Hindu who has spent his entire life loving the personality of Shiva will finally realize at the deeper experiential level that, hold on a second, the very divinity which I have spent my entire life praying to and worshipping is in fact a reflection of the divinity which already exists within me. All I have done is I have externalized that divinity, given it a name, a shape, a form, and worshipped it, without realizing that it is in fact a reflection of the divinity that already exists within me. So here is where we see the beautiful reconciliation between personality-based Hinduism and principle-based Hinduism. So what we understand is that, in fact, the very basis of Hinduism focuses on the idea that everything in the universe is divine, but also that each and every one of us is also divine. The innermost essence of our soul is divinity itself. In Hinduism, we cannot ask the question, does my soul exist? Because our soul is of the nature of existence. We cannot say that because it's because of the soul that everything else comes into existence. It is of the nature of existence. In Hinduism, we cannot ask the question, does my soul know? Because that implies that my soul needs to derive its knowledge from elsewhere. It is of the nature of knowledge itself. In Hinduism, we cannot ask the question, is my soul happy? Because that implies that it derives its happiness from somewhere outside, whereas it is of the nature of happiness itself. It is of the nature of bliss. So existence, knowledge, and bliss, Sat, Chit, Anand, are the words used to describe the innermost essence of our soul, the divinity which is permeating through each and every one of us. And this is the essential nature of this divinity. It is not qualities, because qualities can come one day and go another. This is our essential nature. And there is nothing on earth, there is nothing in the universe which can take that away from us. So the nature of our soul is freedom itself. It is not dependent on anything external to it. It is fully beautiful. It is eternal. It is immortal. It is unchanging. It is unchangeable. And it is of the nature of freedom itself. So in a way, it's a bit like in ancient times when, ancient man realized that fire lives inside a piece of flint and friction is required to call out that fire. So the fire of freedom lives inside each and every one of us. And all that is required is for us to call out that freedom, to manifest that divinity, which is our essential nature. But how do we go about doing this? How do we manifest the divinity within ourselves? The wonderful thing is Hinduism offers a variety of different approaches of doing this. It may involve carrying out elaborate rituals. It may involve living a particular kind of lifestyle. It may involve weeping and prostrating ourselves in front of an image of God. It may involve loving a deity with all of our heart. But it could also involve introspection, contemplation, meditation. The number of pathways are infinite. And that is the beauty of this endeavor of spirituality. We are dealing with the nature of the infinite. So surely the best way that we can do justice to it is by saying that there are an infinite number of ways of manifesting the divinity which already exists within ourselves. So the thing in Hinduism is, yes, we all talk about the soul and how this term soul seems to be very much associated with religion. And it seems a bit not very scientific. There is no empirical evidence for the soul. And perhaps somebody who doesn't believe in religion or spirituality may say, well, rather than referring to it as the soul, why don't we refer it to as the mind? Because all of us believe in the concept of the mind. We all know that we have a mind, and even scientists, they all acknowledge that we have a mind. So rather than calling it a soul, why don't we call it the mind? But in Hinduism, there is a great difference between the mind and the soul. What we do is we liken the concept of the soul to the sun. The sun is self-lit, it is self-effulgent. It does not require any external source of energy to light it up. It is truly self-sufficient in that way, and that is the nature of our soul. And we say that the mind is like the moon. the moon is not self-lit. It is not self-effulgent. In fact, the moon needs to borrow the light of the sun in order to shine. So we say the mind is also very much in the same way. The mind needs to borrow the light of the soul in order to shine, in order to think. So the mind is dependent and our soul is independent. So that shows us that we are not the mind because the mind is dependent. We are also not the body because the body too is dependent. It is dependent on so many things. We depend on heat, light, food, water, shelter. The body is dependent and is therefore not who we truly are. We are not the mind because that too is dependent and is not who we truly are. Who we truly are is this infinite perfection itself. And the purpose of our life is to realize that for ourselves. But if you ask a man on the street, and if we tell him everything that we've been discussing today, he may well very much deny everything we've been talking about. He will say, well, I do not feel as if I am eternal and immortal and unchanging and unchangeable and of the nature of freedom. I do not feel like I'm any of those things. If I were to define who I truly am, I would say I am probably a combination of my body and my mind. My body is who I look like, it's my personality and my character shows through my body, and I am my mind because my mind thinks and makes up decisions which affect my life. So I am a combination of my body and my mind. And even if those things are dependent, so be it. That is the nature of reality. That is the way the cookie crumbles. And this is the essence of who we are. We are truly dependent. And to think that we are independent and ever free is a delusion. So the example sometimes used is, imagine there is a torch in the darkness and you whirl that torch round and round as fast as you can. In the darkness, it seems as if there is a circle of light. You can see a circle of light, but you know in reality that there is no circle of light. It is just the rapid movement of light particles which create the illusion of a circle of light. So it is with our freedom, these people say. It's the rapid firing of electrons and neurons in our brain which create the illusion of such a thing as freedom. There is no such thing as freedom. We are just the body and the mind. So of the two positions, which do we choose? Do we choose to think that we are the body and the mind and that the eternal nature of the soul is a delusion? Or do we choose to think the total opposite? Do we choose to think that who we truly are is of the nature of freedom itself? And to think that we are the body and the mind is the very delusion that we need to try and escape. Of the two positions, which do we choose? For me, it always has to be the latter, to think that all the powers of the universe lie within us, that there is something absolutely incredible about each and every one of us, which is so much more than the physical body, which is so much more than the mind. It is the most empowering thought to think that all the powers in the universe are already ours, and it is we who cover our eyes with our hands and cry that it is dark. All that we need to do is to remove our hands from our eyes, for us to realize that the darkness never actually existed, and we'll realize the light for the first time, which was there all along. Even this idea of thinking of God as a personality is a wonderful way that many people use to relate to the idea of spirituality, to unlock the divinity which exists within themselves. But there is a trap that we can and do fall into when we think of God as a personality. Because the thing is, we are so used to, in our day-to-day lives, being dependent on so many people and we're dependent on so many things, that we start to grow dependent on the personality of God. Things always kind of crack up in our lives. There are always difficult circumstances, challenging circumstances in all of our lives. And it is at those moments that we then try and think, I must turn to my God to help solve all the difficulties of my life. In a way, we start treating God like our fourth emergency service. We've got the police, the fire brigade, the ambulance, and our fourth emergency service is God. And in fact, many Bollywood films, many old Bollywood films revolve around the storyline of somebody who is critically ill in hospital, and the family are crying and wailing around the hospital bed, and the doctors have put their hands up and they've said, sorry chaps, there's nothing we can do to save this person. And the family, they cry and they wail even more, and then they say, hold on, wait a second, all hope is not lost. Let us go to the temple and pray to the mother goddess, and she will surely help us. And in the film, they will rush to the temple and they ring the bell, ding, 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 and they pray their hearts out to the mother goddess, please save us, please help our relative in the hospital. And of course, in the film, the mother goddess shows her mercy, and the person in the hospital makes a miraculous recovery, and everyone cheers and celebrates. It's a lovely storyline, but is in fact not the purpose of our personal God. The purpose of our personal God is to use that to unlock the divinity, the infinite strength, which is already our essential nature. What we don't realize is that when we go through challenging times, when we go through difficult times, we have a tendency to look beyond the skies to try and search for that help, without realizing that in fact all the help that we require is already within us. The skies are already within us. And when that help comes, we think that it comes from somewhere external, without realizing in fact that help that we thought came from outside actually came from within our own selves. But then many people may think, well, this is a very lofty idea, and to think of religion without the concept of a God is very difficult and very challenging. Perhaps this kind of very high-flying thinking is best suited for monks and people who don't live like the rest of us. Perhaps it's best suited to them, because this ideal of thinking that we alone are responsible for everything that goes on in our lives seems to be very daunting. It seems as if we're trying to reach out and touch the sky. It seems like an impossible task. How can we do this? But because it seems like a high ideal, because it seems to be impossible to reach out and touch the sky, it doesn't mend matters to then dig our heads deeper into the sand. Because we find it difficult in this moment to reach the nectar, it doesn't mend matters to drink the poison. So what we are saying is, even though this ideal appears to be so high, aim high, elevate our lives, because ultimately we realize that the essence of who we truly are is this very divinity itself. And it appears to be far because we are so used to being dependent on everyone and everything around us. It is in fact the closest thing to us. Suppose a newborn baby is placed in your arms, and you are told that from that moment onwards, you are solely responsible for the welfare of that little baby. In that moment, your life changes in an instant. All selfish ideas melt away, because your first and foremost responsibility is the welfare of this little child. And so it is, we say in Hinduism, with our fate. Do not leave our fate in the lap of the gods. Do not leave our fate in the hands of the gods who we don't even see. But take full responsibility for our fate, and know that we are the makers of our own destiny. And by taking that responsibility on ourselves, we are making ourselves the highest and best possible versions of ourselves. And we may falter, we may stumble along the way, but let us keep that resolve within us that there is something incredibly special and divine about each and every one of us, until that thought courses through our veins, until it pulses through our very hearts, and we realize that eventually cloud after cloud of delusion will dissolve away, until we realize that it is the sun alone that shines. I'll just end with a little story, just to conclude everything. Once upon a time, there was a guru, and he had 2 disciples. And he was teaching his 2 disciples everything that we've been talking about the eternal nature of the soul, how it is unchanging and unchangeable, how it is immortal, and how it is ever free. And the guru said to his 2 disciples, okay, we've been talking about the eternal nature of the soul, but it's another thing to go and discover it for yourself. So now go home and discover that reality for yourself. And remember that you yourself are the being that you are searching for. So the two disciples went home, and the first disciple went home and he began his spiritual exploration. And he said, okay, who am I? I am the body. That seems like the most obvious answer. I am the body. So the philosophy of my life should just be to eat and drink and be merry. And this first disciple got lost in that train of thought. And the second disciple went home and he began his spiritual exploration. And he asked the question, who am I? And he said, okay, perhaps then I am the body, like the other disciple. But then the second disciple thought more deeply and he said, hold on a second. My guru told me that who I essentially am is unchanging and unchangeable. But I know that my body is constantly changing from childhood to youth to old age. My body is constantly changing. And on top of that, my body is mortal. My body is bound to die one day. And my guru said that who I essentially am is immortal. So how then can I be my body? So the disciple ran back to his guru and he said, sir, I do not think that I am the body because it is constantly changing. And plus it is mortal as well. So I cannot be the body. And the guru smiled. He said, go back and realize it for yourself. You yourself are the being that you are searching for. So the disciple went back home and he thought more deeply. He said, okay, I'm definitely not the body. Perhaps then I am the mind. The mind doesn't die like a physical body does. Perhaps then I am the mind. But then he thought more deeply and he realized that his mind is constantly in a state of flux. It's constantly filled with waves of emotion, of happiness and sadness and elation and depression. The mind is constantly changing. And he said, hold on, my teacher said that the essence of who I am is unchanging and unchangeable. So how then can I be my mind? And the disciple ran back to his teacher and he said, sir, I thought that I might be the mind, but my mind is constantly changing. So how then can I be the mind? And the guru smiled because he knew that he was progressing in the right direction. He said, go back and realize it for yourself. You yourself are the being that you are searching for. And the disciple went back home again and he said, okay, I am not the body and I'm not the mind. Who am I? And this is where he delved deep within himself. And he realized that he was that eternal, blissful perfection itself. He was that divinity. And at that point, there was no need for him to rush back to his teacher for validation because he had realized his essential nature as eternal, immortal, and ever free. I'll leave it there. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Seeta. I think I was particularly spellbound by your explaining the Upanishads. I am notably slow-witted, and you enabled me to understand it much better. But I think a lot of us will have questions. Certainly I do. But I would like to be polite and invite people to use their React heart beneath them and to raise an electronic hand and ask you a question. If not, then I'll start the ball rolling myself. I'll put up an electronic hand to prove that I know how to do it. There we go. You have really painted a picture of a pleasing diversity in Hinduism. When I was a child, there was a lot more talk of people moving between species, and it's quite obvious to me that whether the Atman moves between species or not, I can't tell, but I can tell that a lot of insects are smarter than I am, so it's unlikely that the mind moves between me and them. Do you discount this sort of Hinduism discounted now largely, or what?
So, I mean, reincarnation is a very central idea in Hinduism. And we believe that, we haven't lived just one lifetime, we have lived many lifetimes. But in Hinduism, we also very much believe in the process of evolution as well. So we agree with Darwin on that life basically evolves from simpler forms and becomes more and more complex until we get to the human form. And because obviously all of us have lived multiple lives, it means that all of us have actually undergone the process of evolution ourselves. We've undergone going from simpler organisms, it becoming more and more complex until we have become the human form. And in Hinduism, we obviously believe that what comes with us is our soul, but it is also our mind as well. So as the process of evolution takes place, the mind is perhaps less visible, it's less obvious to see the intelligence in a simpler living organism. But over the course of evolution, it kind of unfolds and it becomes more and more visible that this animal has developed intelligence, and then we all eventually become human beings, and our intelligence is more fully manifested in that way. And we keep going round and round in the cycle of being born and dying and being reborn again. The thing is, once we have acquired the human form, it's unlikely that we would go back to another species, because we have developed such incredible complexity. Our intellect, our mind is all fully functioning. So it is unlikely that we would go backwards in that process. Once we have become human, we probably keep being reborn as human until eventually we become enlightened, and then there is no need for us to be reborn again. So I hope that makes sense.
It does, thank you. I didn't realize it was unidirectional. That's reassuring that I won't end up as a nematode.
No, of course not.
Bill.
Hi, yeah, thanks very much, Seeta. I'm really sorry I
you.
arrived a bit late. So I missed the very beginning of it. I found that fascinating, and it just awakened stuff for me when I did Hinduism at universities a long time ago.
Great.
But something that always fascinated me about not just Hinduism but Dharmic ways of thinking, I suppose, is the paradox that's involved, which seems to fly in the face of a lot of Western logic. And particularly, and I forget which Upanishad it is in, but you will be able to tell me when it says that God is neither male nor female, yet both male and female. And the lovely one, that God is, and yet God is not. And it's those kinds of things that really push to the deeper, to the deeper thinking.
Yeah.
And then sometime later, I sort of came up across. And I'm not going to be able to think of it now. I had it a minute ago. Oh, this is terrible. That's an age thing. But it's to do with the physics, the microscopic physics. Somebody
Right.
help me. Sorry?
No, I'm just listening to what you're saying.
Oh, this is terrible. But where you have the notion that at the microcosmic level, particles neither exist but well, they're neither there, and I've forgotten the term for it now, so somebody please help me out. But it just strikes me that there are elements of wisdom and of stretching the mind within Dharmic traditions that don't seem to be in particularly in Enlightenment thinking, but actually which now seem to resonate with some of the microphysics. And I just wondered, how what you would say about that kind of the way of thinking within the Upanishads. Sorry, that was really garbled.
No, not at all. It's really fascinating. Thank you for your question. So, very much so, this concept of divinity, it doesn't have a gender. When you think of the divine principle, it obviously doesn't have a gender, because a personality will, of course, have a gender. And in Hinduism, we've got male and female deities. But when we think of the divine principle, it is beyond gender, because gender is a physical attribute. So divinity is beyond that. So in essence, when we are looking at it from that perspective, it doesn't have a gender. And it's very interesting what you were saying about this idea of the microphysics. My dad studied quantum mechanics under Sir Roger Penrose. So he was, he found it absolutely fascinating, the amount of synergies between science and spirituality, because from the Hindu perspective, we very much focus on the metaphysical, and how there is a metaphysical underpinning to the entirety of the universe. And my dad found it absolutely incredible that the latest cutting edge discoveries of modern science, the quantum mechanics, very much point to the fact that the foundation to our universe is non-material. In fact, the very foundation to our universe, I'm not a physics expert by any means, so please correct me if I'm wrong. The foundation to our universe is these kind of non-material interconnections. Everything is deeply interconnected at a metaphysical level. And my dad dedicated his life to understanding the synergies between science and spirituality. The beautiful thing is that the ancient Hindus, they didn't have all of these incredible gadgets and gizmos to discover all of these deep insights into the nature of reality. And I think that really proves the power of introspection, that all the powers in the universe are essentially within us. How did they know these things? How did they develop such deep insights, which cutting edge discoveries of modern science are also pointing to? And it's fascinating to look at the synergies at the metaphysical, non-material level between science and spirituality. I hope that's some help.
If I may, still sorry to, but that's lovely to hear, because I got there in the end, quantum physics.
Yes.
But it's kind of like what's holding it. That's about energy and the way that energy holds things together, and then you get things like sound waves and all of that, the way that affects in, and it's just fascinating. So thank you so much for that.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you, Seeta. Thank you, Bill. Michael, please.
Thank you very much, Seeta. That was really interesting. And you've actually raised lots of questions. The first one I had was along the same lines that Steve mentioned around reincarnation and so on. I've got two other questions, actually. One of them was, as I understood it, you were saying that within Hinduism, the creation of a sect, as it were, of a sort of strand of thinking and so on, is not a problem at all. And that kind of sense of springing out in all sorts of denominations or whatever, is almost encouraged. And so I was wondering, in a way, like what you've presented to us has been really very, very interesting and so on, and fascinating, in fact. But I was just wondering, to what extent do you think what you've just said is actually one little strand, one thread of a much bigger cord or carpet or something of Hindu beliefs, and or to what extent is it actually mainstream, as it were, and should be considered to be authentically Hindu?
Sure. No, that's a really wonderful question. So the first thing that I would like to address is, we said that, Hinduism is home to hundreds and thousands of sectarian movements. But the wonderful thing is, it doesn't mean that it's a kind of pluralistic approach. Pluralism is at the heart of Hinduism, but there are many ways to be spiritual. There are many ways to think of and approach the idea of spirituality. That is the essence of Hinduism. And that is why there is such a broadness, such a variety in Hinduism. But pluralism does not mean relativism. It does not mean that anything and everything goes. It doesn't mean that I pick up a rock one day and say, oh, I'm going to worship this rock and here's a new sectarian movement. It is not like that, because these sectarian movements have some enlightened individual, some individual who has had some kind of a spiritual experience and said, you know what, this is the way that worked for me. And this is how I can help other people to also achieve a spiritual experience. So there is the foundation of spiritual experience behind these sectarian movements. It is not a case that anything and everything goes. And in terms of understanding what is the essence of Hinduism, because it is so incredibly vast, and how do you know what is authentic, and how do you know what is mainstream and not what is mainstream? And I would say probably the mainstream Hindus would probably love to still consider thinking of God as a personality. That has been a major way that many millions of Hindus have thought about and related to the idea of spirituality. But underpinning it all is very much this pluralistic approach. Because if you go, for example, to a Hindu home, or if you go to a Hindu temple, you'll probably find not just one image of God, you'll find a whole cluster of them all bunched together, and they are not in conflict with each other. They are not fighting with each other. If you go to a temple, suppose it's a Krishna temple, and you enter the Krishna temple, it won't just be an image of Krishna. You'll be, all the other gods and goddesses will be surrounding you as well. Because with this idea in Hinduism, it is so intrinsic, is that if the enterprise of spirituality is dealing with the infinite, then surely there must be an infinite number of ways of thinking about and approaching the infinite. By saying that there is only one way, we are in a way doing injustice to the nature of what the infinite is all about. Why not keep it broad? Why not keep it vast? And that is the beauty of it. And the essence is, you are empowered to choose the path that suits you the most. If you choose a particular sectarian movement, if you choose to think of God as a personality or as a principle, that is the path that is authentic to you. But know that you're going to meet all your other friends at the other end of it all. And the beautiful example that my dad often used is something like a circle experiment. So imagine everyone sits in a circle and they are all asked to point to the center of the circle. And suppose I'm standing here and I say, the way that I get to the center of the circle is if I take 2 steps north. But then I look at the person who is directly opposite me, and for him to get to the center, he would say, I need to take 2 steps south. And then you discuss your prescriptions. I say, I need to take 2 steps north. And he's like, no, I need to take 2 steps south. And when you discuss the prescriptions, they look completely contradictory to each other. It feels as if there is no reconciliation. But Hinduism says, once you have chosen your path, stick to it. So this is my path. I'm choosing to go 2 steps north. I take 2 steps north and I get closer to the center. But then my friend opposite me is also on his path and he also takes 2 steps south. And what we find is that we are both closer to the center. Not only are we both closer to the center, we both feel a greater affinity towards each other. So the litmus test in Hinduism, are you making spiritual progress, is, do you feel a greater affinity with everyone around you as well, whether they are on the same path as you or not? Because ultimately we are all headed towards the same destination. I hope that helps.
That's a beautiful thought. No, thank you very much. That's marvelous. I should
you.
reuse that many times.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful
Can I ask one more? Sorry, I don't want to hog your time, but I mean, and this I kind of hesitate to raise this, but it does keep coming up, and it's really if the nature of us is our soul and our mind, the soul being eternal and immortal and a sign of divinity within us, and the mind and an emanation of that and so on. How does that fit with a society based on a caste system, which seems to be the antithesis of those beautiful spiritual thoughts, and I just wondered what your answer might be to that.
Yes, it's a question that we've had to answer multiple times.
Sure.
You're welcome to look on our Hindu Academy channel for many videos we have created, because it's a huge misconception that really does need addressing. Because, we've talked about all this lovely airy fairy divinity within all of us. So how can that mean that we justify this horrendous hereditary hierarchical caste system? How can we justify it? And the reason that it happens is, we are human beings, and it was a failure on our part. And it's not just a failing which took place on the Indian subcontinent. It's a problem that we have everywhere around the world. We see this stratification in society. The way that it began in a very sort of noble cause, and it begins in a way that all of us can understand, because every single individual is born with a certain set of aptitudes and abilities. So it naturally became obvious that, this person is very good at science, so we should streamline them towards being scientists. And this person is very good at art, so we should streamline this person towards art. So we see this stratification happening, and it's something that we all do to this day, and there is nothing wrong with that. However, the problem comes when, you go to the poorer regions of India, for example, and there is very little social mobility. And for example, imagine there is a potter and he doesn't know what else to teach his son apart from pottery, for example. And he says to his son, this is pottery, this is our family livelihood, this is the tradition that you keep up. and the son would become a potter because there is no other alternative. He doesn't have any leverage, any economic power to move beyond what his family has set up. So that he becomes a potter, and then his son will become a potter, and then his son will become a potter. But have you noticed what is happening on the Indian subcontinent now? India is growing as a global economic power. And that means that the hereditary hierarchical caste system is breaking up incredibly. Now the potter's son will say, hang on, Dad, you know what? I don't want to be a potter. I want to go and become an IT specialist in the Silicon Valley. No, you know what, Dad? I want to become a doctor. I want to become the top surgeon in the top hospital. And the dad would not be saying, oh, how dare you change our profession? He'll be happy. He'll be like, fantastic, go for it. Good for you. And what does that show us? It shows us that the hereditary hierarchical caste system is not given any sanction in the scriptures of authority in Hinduism. It is not a religious ideal. It is not a religious teaching by any means. It is purely based on social and economic circumstances. It is a human failing. It has been a human failing. And we have to acknowledge it for that. But we understand now that the economic landscape is changing so dramatically that it is falling to pieces. And we hope that it continues in that way as quickly as possible. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. That's very, very helpful. It's great knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Dilip, please.
Hi there. Hi, Seeta. How are you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to start off by saying that what a wonderful and fluent presentation that was. That's just phenomenal. I mean, I'm absolutely engrossed in it. So thank you for that as well. I'm going to make the recording available after this, by the way. Maybe it's a question for later.
Yeah,
so
yes, we are.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay. So my question, Hinduism to me was very simple when I was younger. Yes. I was told what to do. I did it without questioning. That's just the way we were brought up. And I had no issues. And then at some stage in my life, I decided to find out more. And that's in a way turned out to be a bit of a rabbit hole, because I think, Seeta, you already alluded to this, that it's wide, it's vast. So when I started reading about Advaita and Dvaita, and I think you touched upon those in your lecture. So how do you reconcile that? Because it felt like you were talking about the two options, and then that seemed to merge. And I'm just wondering how you went from one to the other. Was it an overlap? Is it mutually exclusive, or how does it work in practice?
Sure. No, thank you so much for the question. So the wonderful thing is, all of us are on our own spiritual pathway, like we were saying before, and we find that there is an incredible reconciliation between the personality-based, the Dvaita approach, and the impersonal principle-based approach, Advaita. There is a beautiful reconciliation, and on paper it looks as if, how can there be any reconciliation? They seem like two very different approaches. But like we were saying, the conclusion of that love that you have for the deity, whether it be Shiva or Vishnu or Mother Goddess or whichever deity it is, the conclusion of that love is where the boundary or the distinction between myself and my God falls away. And I am no longer able to distinguish myself from the deity that I love. And the conclusion of that love is, you know what? I realize finally that this divinity which I was worshipping my entire life outside of myself is in fact a reflection of the divinity which is already within me. And that is where we see the beautiful reconciliation between the personality-based approach and the principle-based approach. So I hope that helps.
But sorry, just for all the, so it almost sounds like you have this personal journey where you crossed that boundary, as it were. But you also said, for the example you gave about the guru and the two disciples, was almost like you need to retire somewhere. And I'm thinking, I don't think I'm ready to become a sadhu yet.
Yes.
So what's the journey typically people would have to typically take to cross that boundary?
Sure. Sure. I mean, this is the wonderful thing is if the path of introspection suits you, then that's a wonderful thing. But it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be. It could involve very much living life in the world and seeing the divinity in everyone around you. And that's the basis of your ethics and morality. Why should I care about everyone around me? Why should I care for the environment around me? And when we see that all as a reflection of divinity, then that is the essence of spiritual living. You are living spirituality in your day life. It does not mean that you need to retire into the caves and grow a long beard and just sit there and think. You have to be like that. It can very much involve being active, being out there in the community, doing positive things, because we recognize that everyone and everything is a reflection of that divinity. And in fact, the Bhagavad Gita, our central scripture, very much focuses on the idea of how to make spirituality practical in our everyday life. And that is why it's our central scripture, because it is one thing to talk about the esoteric philosophy, but it's another to remember how we can put it into practice in our everyday life. So that's why the Bhagavad Gita is a wonderful source of information for us to know how to make it practical for ourselves.
Thank you, Seeta.
Thank you.
Raises lots more questions, but I'll let other people get in.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both very much. You embarrassed me there, Dilip, when you talked about retiring to a cave, because with some embarrassment, I suddenly realized I haven't shaved this morning. Jenny, please.
Yes. Yeah, thank you, Seeta, for that really wonderful talk. It's really inspiring and
thank you.
Food for thought. It's not so much a question as just an observation or something you were talking about that really struck me. You were talking about, you know, the infinite and it, as opposed to, say, God and he, as a lot of as we hear a lot of the time with various faiths.
Yes.
And I find that a very it opens your mind more to the infinity of God, or whatever we call it.
Yes.
I'm just, as a slightly flippant aside, I'm reminded of somebody who is having a T-shirt made up to say, whatever you think God is, he's bigger than that.
Yes, definitely.
And I just feel that fits very well with what you've been talking about, the concept of infinity. And thank you very much.
Oh no, thank you. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is it's beyond gender, but if you want to ascribe a gender to the divine, then by all means do so. And I think Hinduism is a wonderful example that God doesn't just need to be a man. God can be seen as female as well. And we've got so many different forms of the mother goddess. And interestingly, the idea basically sprung from the most ancient concepts of God in Hinduism, where to think of God as a female. And the reason why, interestingly, is, you know, we realize that, hang on, females are the ones who give birth and they're the ones who give life. So it made sense for us to think, oh, well, God must be a female because God is the one who gives life to our world. The God is the one who gives life to our universe. So that idea came very naturally in Hinduism. But God can be male, God can be female, God can be a divine principle. You can refer to it or him or her in whichever way suits you the best.
Thank you very much. Our next questioner is our esteemed chair of the South East England Faith Forum, Iyad.
Thank you. That was really fascinating and so informative. So my question is, for an average person to be on the Hindu spiritual path, what are the practices to then hopefully connect with one's soul, or as you called it, one's divinity, or the overall divinity?
Yes.
I hope that makes sense.
Yes, no, it does. Thank you so much. So in Hinduism, we've got a variety of different approaches based on your concept of God. So it may involve loving a deity with all of our heart, developing a personal relationship with God. I think the wonderful thing is we as human beings are very good at building personal relationships with those around us, our family and our friends. So it's almost like, why don't we utilize that skill to also help us build a personal relationship with God? So one pathway could be loving a deity with all of our heart, but it doesn't have to be that way. Sometimes it could even involve thinking about the principle-based approach. And when you think about the principle-based approach, it could very much involve going out in the community and reminding ourselves that everyone and everything is divine. And that is the reason for my ethics and my morality. The reason why I should care, the reason why I should love everyone around me is because they are a reflection of that divinity as well. So we have, you know, the way of thinking of God as a personality. We have this approach of thinking that everyone and everything around us is divine. It may involve selfless activity, selfless service. It could involve introspection and meditation and yoga, because yoga is a very central idea in Hinduism as well. The thing is, in the West, the idea of yoga is very much associated with physical exercises and how I can get fit and healthy so I can go out there and crunch and munch everything in the world a bit more for a longer period of time. But in fact, there is so much more to the concept of yoga. It's a fascinating topic where we don't just focus on developing control over the physical body. We focus on developing control over our mind, our intellect. Every aspect of our being needs to come under our control, because there are so many things, parts of us, which we are not in fact in control of, and we think we are. We're not in control of our mind and all the waves of emotions. So yoga is very much about developing that inner control of every aspect of our being. So the wonderful thing is you can choose the path that suits you the most. But in fact, we say it is so incredibly broad, it doesn't even need to relate to a particular religion. You can be spiritual without reference to a religion. And we say the litmus test for knowing if you are on the right path is, if I'm doing a particular activity, suppose I'm painting or reading or, you know, playing sports or doing anything that I love, and it makes me feel uplifted and inspired, know that you are in that moment living spiritually, because it is making you lift yourself out of yourself. When you're painting or drawing or reading, in that moment you forget yourself, you forget your little limitations. In that moment you are free. And you know, 3 hours pass by and you think, I feel so uplifted and inspired. And know that perhaps that is the right way for you. To be spiritual without even reference to a religion is also possible, according to Hinduism.
Thank you. Is it okay if I share something, Steve?
Of course, sir. Of course.
I don't know if you're familiar with the Sufi spiritual path. The spiritual path says that divinity, to find God, it's not in the mosque, but it's in the other person's heart. And it's exactly what you just said, that if you treat everyone, and sorry, forgive me, as Muslims, not as God, but
yes,
that God is within that person's heart.
Yes.
So you've got to treat that person, if you love God,
yes,
to love that person as best as you can. So we share that with you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's so lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we've got time for one more, and we have Kathy.
Hello. Thank you again for a very informative talk. I've learned a lot.
Thank you.
And what I really understand is the basis of everything that you're talking about is so similar to all of the other religions.
Yes.
You know, that's
so beautiful. Yes.
Yeah, and the basis is love, really.
Yeah.
And so love of God, love of man, you know, and the idea of the quantum mechanics, that more they're talking, the physicists are now talking about, you know, what is love and quantum physics and things like that. And one of the quotes I like about from Abdul Baha from the Baha'i faith is the idea that love binds together the diverse elements of the material world and directed the movements of the spheres in the celestial realms, so that the basis of everything is love.
Yes.
And you know that when the last bit you mentioned about, you know, losing yourself in sport or something, that's loving it in a way that, you know, your ego goes, you know, so it's all down to love. Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's so beautiful, because ultimately we are all headed in the same trajectory, whether it appears that way or not. And that is the conclusion of it all. We forget our little limitations and we see that purity and that divinity in whatever we are doing in everyone that we are interacting with.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you ever so much. Please don't all go away quite yet, but I just want to ramble on for 2 minutes. I would like to thank, of course, Seeta, who has given us a wonderful talk, and which has been recorded through the good offices of Nishit, and we will make it available in due course. I'd like to thank also David and Emil and Nishit for their work in designing the poster, in putting the poster out in terms of audiovisual work today. Thank you all very much indeed. I'd like to thank all of you for coming. I would like to thank Stephen and Matthew Jenkerson for their support in naming this lecture series after their husband and mother. I would also like to thank the rest of the CEIF board. We've been very slow at getting this going, and this has been my fault entirely. But now we are motoring, and it will be every 2 months. And under normal circumstances, it will be on the second Thursday of every month. So on that basis, the next one ought to be on the 13th, I hope you're not superstitious, of March. The speaker will be another of Eton's tutors, Imam Monawar Hussain, and also someone from the Sufi tradition originally, of which Iyad spoke. And he's going to take us his subject, the argument for interfaith activity in general. I can't absolutely confirm that it will be on that day, because he's not absolutely certain, but we'll come back a day as close as possible, which is also convenient to those of us who are keeping the thing running. I'd also like to appeal to Bill Moore. I'd like to appeal to Karen as chair of Windsor Maidenhead Sacre. I'd like to appeal to those of you who are on Sacres, those of you who teach in schools and have sixth formers and so on, who would benefit from coming to these lectures. Our aim is to light a big candle for mutual religious understanding. And so do not feel that school teachers are not welcome. Do not feel that sixth formers are not welcome. Everybody is welcome. And thank you all ever so much for coming. And if you would like to be put onto our mailing list, the poster has on it an email, Emil's email at Art Beyond Belief in Slough or Slough Faith Partnership. If not, you can look on the website, their website, and send us your email, and we will routinely send you out an invitation. Thank you all very much indeed, and Seeta especially, thank you. And my thanks to your father, who I'm sure was here in spirit.
Thank you so much. Really kind. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Stephen, sorry, can I just add here? You mentioned quite a few groups who should be invited here. You got really good representation from the Bracknell Forest Interfaith Forum here as well. That's worth recognizing. And our chairs set that at the top left-hand corner of my screen there as well, Kathy. So another way of promoting it, I think.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. Yes.
Could I interject, Steve, please? Dilip, I've just responded your email. It has come to me.